Number 3. Yvonne Leroux. On the morning of November 30th, 1971, a person who worked as a caretaker on an estate in King, Ontario, was driving to his job. King is north of Toronto. The estate was on a dead-end road, generally only used by people who lived on it, people visiting them, and people who worked for the residents. The caretaker heard a car leaving. He decided to investigate. He found the dead body of a young woman lying on the road. It appeared she had been shot in the head, and the frozen road was splattered with blood. The man called the police. The body was identified as 16-year-old Yvonne Leroux. It was determined that Yvonne had been murdered a few minutes before her body was found. She had not been shot. Instead, she had been beaten in the head with a blunt object that was never found. The strikes were intense and fractured her skull and lacerated her brain. She also had been sexually assaulted. It did not appear that the motive behind her murder was robbery because her purse was found with her body. She was last seen leaving a youth counseling clinic the night before in Toronto, about 14 miles from where her body was found. Before her murder, Yvonne had a difficult life. She had lived in Toronto with her parents and her 3 siblings. When she was 15, 4 young men raped her. Her friends and family noticed a major change in her personality after the assault. A short time later, she ran away from home and ended up in Windsor, Ontario, which is across the river from Detroit, Michigan. 9 months later, she returned home. She became involved in the drug scene and experimented with drugs. In August 1971, 3 months before she was murdered, Yvonne went to the police. She was afraid for her life. She had been involved with a biker gang, and they wanted her to take part in a drug ring. They wanted her to drop off drugs in specified locations. She had refused, so she thought that the gang was going to kill her. There were no drugs in her system when she was killed, but the police believed that her murder was connected to drugs. However, they never found any evidence to charge anyone, so the case went cold. Over the next 5 decades, the police investigated the murder. Twice they offered rewards of $50,000, but no progress was made on the case. Then in 2022, the police used what they called investigative genetic genealogy. They found relatives of the killer and narrowed it down to a single suspect. In November 2023, 51 years after the murder, they identified Bruce Charles Cantillon as the killer. He was 26 years old at the time of the murder. In December 1963, when Cantillon was 16, he was arrested after sexually assaulting 3 women over 3 days. In one case, he inappropriately touched a 16-year-old girl and struck her on the head with a steel pipe. The young woman survived. She needed 8 stitches to close the gash on her head. After assaulting the girl, Cantillon stole a car and struck a 55-year-old pedestrian with the vehicle. The man survived, but suffered a broken pelvis and leg, among other injuries. Cantillon served 6 years in prison for the crimes. In 2023, it was too late to charge Cantillon with Yvonne's murder. He died by suicide in July 1974, 19 months after the murder. The police have not said if Yvonne and Cantillon knew each other. However, Yvonne was known to hitchhike, so there is speculation that Cantillon picked her up. The police are currently investigating Bruce Charles Cantillon to see if he committed any other murders. Number 2. Pauline Brazeau. At the end of 1975, 16-year-old Pauline Brazeau moved with her 7-month-old daughter and older sister from Yorkton, Saskatchewan to Calgary, Alberta to live with her aunt. The young mother wanted to start over in a new city. She got a job as a waitress at an Italian restaurant. She told her employers that she was nearly 19 years old. Early on the morning of January 9, 1976, about a month after coming to Calgary, Pauline was hanging out at the restaurant where she worked with a relative and 2 friends. They ate some food and drank some alcohol. Around 3 a.m., Pauline left the restaurant by herself. Her aunt lived a block away from the restaurant. The next morning, around 9 a.m., Pauline Brazeau's partially clad dead body was found on a logging road outside of Cochrane, Alberta, a city just over 20 miles northwest of Calgary. The 16-year-old mother had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. It wasn't long before the case went colder than a winter night in Calgary. The problem was that Pauline was a young, quiet woman who moved to the city about a month before the murder. So the police didn't think she was targeted. Instead, it was a crime of opportunity. The police thought she made it back home, but went back outside for some fresh air. She may have walked back towards the restaurant and hitchhiked along the way. The killer then picked her up. But this was only speculation. The police had no suspects. In 1995, the case was reopened by a cold case task force, but no progress was made on the case. 27 years later, in 2021, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, also known as the RCMP, and the Calgary Police reviewed all of Calgary's cold cases to see if they could be solved with modern technology. The following year, the RCMP sent evidence to the private DNA company Orthram Incorporated. They got a DNA sample and created a profile. It was then sent back to the RCMP, who worked with Convergence Investigative Genetic Genealogy, a private genetic genealogy company. They came up with a suspect who was not a person of interest at the time. He is 73-year-old Ronald James Edwards, who was living in Sundre, Alberta. Sundre is a town about 70 miles north of Calgary. At the time of the murder, Edwards was 26 years old. Edwards had a disturbing criminal record. On September 9, 1989, when he was 40, he met an 18-year-old sex worker on a street in Calgary. He gave her $200 to come back to his house. He claimed he just wanted companionship and not sex. But then, when they got to his house, he pulled out a large hunting knife. He forced her to perform a sex act at knife point. He also kept threatening her. He said things like she'll never get out of the house alive. There was a struggle, and Edwards slashed her twice on the face, 4 times on one of her arms, and once on her hand. She then kicked Edwards in the stomach. While naked, she managed to break a window and climb through it onto the roof. She jumped off the roof into a neighbor's yard. The jump broke both of her ankles and crushed her vertebrae. But she was rescued, and Edwards was arrested. Edwards pleaded guilty to attempted murder and sexual assault. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. On November 8, 2023, 47 years after the murder of 16-year-old Pauline Brazeau, Edwards was arrested. Edwards is being held in custody until his trial. Number 1. Marie-Chantale Desjardins. On July 16, 1994, 10-year-old Marie-Chantale Desjardins set off on her bike from her family's home in Sainte-Thérèse, a Montreal, Quebec suburb. That night, she did not return home. Her mother, Sylvie Desjardins, reported her missing around 10 p.m. Sylvie thought that Marie-Chantale had run away. A few weeks earlier, Sylvie, Marie-Chantale, and Marie-Chantale's half-brother had moved into the home of Sylvie's partner. They had moved from a neighboring suburb, Blainville. Marie-Chantale was unhappy about the move. But when Marie-Chantale did not return home after a day, her mother knew something was wrong. The police managed to track Marie-Chantale's movements on the last day she was seen. That morning, she left her home to go to a friend's house. The friend wasn't staying home, so Marie-Chantale left and went to an arcade with a snack shop and spent much of the day there. She then met another group of friends and hung out with them until 5 p.m. She told them she was heading home for dinner. The mother of one of Marie-Chantale's friends said she saw her riding her bike in the suburb center around 9:30 that night. That was the last confirmed sighting of her. On July 20th, 1994, 4 days after 10-year-old Marie-Chantale Desjardins went missing, her body and bicycle were found by a searcher in a wooded area behind a shopping center in Rosemary, a suburb that neighbors St. Therese. Her body was found about 4 miles from where she was last seen. She was partially dressed. It's believed she had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. It was thought she had been dead for at least 2 days, meaning she could have been kept alive by her killer for a day and a half before she was killed. The police worked on the case, but they didn't have any viable evidence. They did think that the murder could have been connected to another murder. On June 22, 1994, less than a month before Chantal Marie was killed, 19-year-old Melanie Cabet spent the evening at a friend's house in Montreal. Afterward, she was going to take the bus to the home she shared with her mother. Sadly, she never made it there. Less than 2 weeks later, on July 5th, her body was found under some shingles in a wooded area in Mascouche, another Montreal suburb. She had been struck over the head with an object and strangled to death. She had also been raped. Turned out that the day after Melanie went missing, a woman was hitchhiking in Montreal. A man picked her up and took her to the area where her body was found. The woman was sexually assaulted but not killed. She described the attacker, and it resulted in this sketch. The police thought that the same man could be responsible for all 3 attacks, but no arrests were made in any of the cases, and they all went cold. Then, on December 12, 2023, 29 years after the murder, La Sûreté de Québec, which is Quebec's provincial police, announced they had made an arrest in the case. They had charged 61-year-old Riel Courtemarche with first-degree murder and the killing of Marie-Chantale Desjardins. At the time, Courtemarche was incarcerated in La Maza institution in Quebec. He had been in and out of prison for most of his adult life for crimes like armed robbery and armed assault. In 2015, he was labeled a dangerous offender, which, according to the CBC, is, quote, reserved for Canada's most violent criminals and sexual predators. Crown attorneys can seek the designation during sentencing and must show that there's a high risk that the criminal will commit violent or sexual offenses in the future. The designation carries an automatic sentence of imprisonment for an indeterminate period with no chance of parole for 7 years, unquote. He received the label after being convicted of kidnapping and armed assault in March 2014. The crime happened on June 30, 2011. A 27-year-old woman had stopped at a convenience store in Princeville, Quebec. 49-year-old Courtemarche got into the back seat. When she got back into the car, he pulled a knife out on her and told her to drive to a park. Once there, the woman tried to fight Courtemarche off. He grabbed her by the hair and dragged her down a path. The woman convinced Courtemarche to go back to the car. When they did, another vehicle arrived and the woman got help from them. Courtemarche was arrested. In 2021, Courtemarche went for parole and he was denied. Experts considered him a high-risk offender who was a pathological liar and manipulator. He underwent a phallometric evaluation, and results indicate he is turned on by rape with humiliation. In 1994, when Marie-Chantale was murdered, he was 32 years old. The police said that they connected Courtemarche to the murder through what they called advanced forensic biology methods. The prosecution was asked if Courtemarche was responsible for any other murders or assaults, like Melanie Cabet's murder or the woman who was sexually assaulted the day after she was killed. The prosecution said they would have charged him if they connected him to any other crime. However, they said they would charge him if new evidence or information surfaced. But with the current evidence, he's only being charged with the murder of Marie-Chantale. After Riel Courtemarche was charged with Marie-Chantale's murder, he had a brief court appearance where he pleaded not guilty to the charge of first-degree murder. The Crown Attorney is hoping for a speedy trial. 61-year-old Riel Courtemarche will remain in prison until his trial. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please don't forget to check out our new channel, Paranormally Listed, There's a link on the screen now, and there's a link in the description box below this video. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.